Motorsports and football are two sports that dominate the earth. Kinda. And you would think that any business venture between the two would work wonders for either party. But, as has been proven in the past, they kinda go together like Tiger Woods and a set of car keys. There have been some times where a football team sponsored race teams, such as with the Chelsea and Sauber partnership, and the Newcastle United Lister Storm GT car. But apart from that, the two sports never really cross paths that often. But with the recent fast surrounding the Super League, it reminded me of a championship where all cars had title sponsorship from football clubs. Or for my American viewers, soccer. By the way, if football is what you're here for, stick with me. We will be talking about your favourite football clubs, and Tottenham, in due course. This thing was called Superleague Formula, and it was a weird thing. I mean, we have had instances where football clubs have sponsored racing teams before, but this was a completely new concept. A whole racing series that revolves around football clubs. Now, because I'm a New Zealander, I know nothing about football, so I've drafted in someone else to help me explain the concept of this series. Oh, by the way, Tomo, what's your thoughts on the Super League?
It's an absolute shambles, mate. Announced and subsequently imploded in less time than a Grand Prix weekend lasts, for crying out loud. For these 12 elite clubs to try and steal that hope away from all clubs in Europe, the kind of hope that sends Leicester from the third tier of English football to Premier League champions in 8 years. Wow. Those fairy tales don't exist if only the big clubs, again, whatever that means. How the f*** are Tottenham in there? Bruh. These things don't happen with a closed system with only certain teams guaranteed entry. A cash grab by Perez, not Checo, to right the financial mismanagement at his own club Real Madrid, combined with the greed of these billionaire owners who own these football clubs and don't have a Scooby, don't care about communicating with fans. It would have altered the game forever, and it would have destroyed so many lower league clubs because it would devalue the leagues. So that trickle-down money wouldn't get to the teams that really need it. These owners are a bunch of self-centered, arrogant, delusional, money-grabbing Sorry, calm. Back to motor racing's answer to the Super League, kind of. The Premier 1 Grand Prix. I hadn't heard of it either. Planned to kick off in 2002, the idea was to assemble a bunch of cars built to a pretty similar spec to the Formula 1 cars at the time. So very bloody quick. But instead of being adorned by different motor racing affiliated brands, they'd all be representing a different football club each. Apparently 40% of football season ticket holders have a keen interest in motor racing, according to their own research. Which I can believe as a fan of both. There's definitely an overlap there. Anderlecht, Leeds, Benfica, Lyon, Chelsea, Valencia and Feyenoord were all interested with the intention of getting up to 30 clubs involved in total. Global brands racing around the world in these diet Formula 1 cars. I'm not gonna lie, if West Ham were to be involved, I probably would have been pretty interested, but I doubt we were, because we're bang average. It's kind of reminiscent of another championship with identical chassis that would race around the world, but not with typical motorsport related brands on them, and ultimately failing. A1GP, of course, where different cars would race for different nationalities and the drivers would be of that nation, kind of like a World Cup of motor racing. A fantastic idea. I hope that idea is revisited at some point down the line because the concept is great. You could have K-Mag and Christian Lundgaard, you could have Vettel and Hulkenberg, you could have Hamilton and Norris. That concept would work a treat. Maybe it's like an off-season, one-off event. I'd love to see that. But yeah, football and motorsport coming together, having a little baby together. To me, Josh, sounds pretty dreamy.
Well, that was a lot to take in. Dreamy, huh? Well, let's talk about this series and see whether it's still dreamy. So, after failing to get off the ground under Premier 1 Grand Prix, the series organizer woke up one morning and thought, I'ma do it. But this time, it will be called Superleague Formula. It was a spec series with cars designed by Panos. They had a push-to-pass system and a 4.2 litre V12 engine that developed 750 brake horsepower. Add all of this together and the cars were pretty slow compared to other cars in the category. But the concept of a V12 powered open wheel race car in the relative modern age is a tantalizing prospect for those types of racing fans that believe that noise is the only thing that matters in motor racing. And I mean, hey, to be fair, they did sound glorious. But at the end of the day, that's just noise. What was everything else like? Well, August 31st, 2008, the first round of the inaugural season of the Superleague Formula Championship at Donington. This is when the world would find out if this was a championship worth following. As for how the racing weekends worked, well, that was about as odd as the whole f***ing thing itself. Qualifying utilized a knockout format that you would normally see in football tournaments. The field would be split into 2 groups, with each having a 15-minute qualifying session. The fastest 4 from each group would go through to the quarterfinals, where 2 drivers would face off with 1 flying lap each. It would whittle down to the semi-finals, before eventually a final. Is it a strange format? You bet it is. Was it good? I mean, I guess, if you're into that. The round would be relatively dominated by Ferrari test driver Davide Ragon, except Ragon was never really referred to by his real name, instead by the team he represented, Beijing Guan. And that was the same throughout the entire field. Robert Dornbos was AC Milan, Adrian Valles was Liverpool, Craig Dolby was Anderlecht, and Duncan Tappy was... nah, who cares? As for the racing itself, it was generally a standard run-of-the-mill racing that you would normally get in series such as Formula Renault 3.5 and such. The only thing is, you watch Junior Formula to witness the next crop of talent coming through the ranks. Whereas with this thing, you were only really rooting for the clubs. And in its first season, there were only 18 clubs in this thing. Decent grid numbers by motor racing standards, but while I'm no footballist, I'm relatively confident that there are more than 18 clubs in the world. A similar concept was trialled with A1GP, which proclaimed itself as the World Cup of Motorsport. But at least there you had whole nations to cheer for. It's a little hard to pledge allegiance to football clubs, especially if your favourite one isn't there. Ultimately, the series ran on with a relatively stable grid for a few years. There was even a game made for the series, which was just a rebadged version of R-Factor, but who am I to judge? The 2008 season was won by Davide Ragon, 2009 by Adrian Valles, and 2010 by Ragon again. Or to put it correctly, it was won by Beijing Guan, Liverpool, and Anderlecht respectively. But while 2010 saw a healthy collection of 19 clubs on the grid, heading into the 2011 season, there were only 6 clubs. Another thing to note around this time was the series title sponsor, Sanangol Group, an Angolan oil company that was dishing out a hell of a lot of money for this type of championship. This included a cash super final where 100,000 euros were distributed per round, and around the same time as their sponsorship of Superleague Formula. They were being queried about some money that had gone missing. So shady-ish sponsor, a depleting grid, and now only 6 clubs in the competition, with them being Anderlecht, Eindhoven, Bordeaux, those ones, Atletico Madrid, and Galatasaray.
We did 20 ticks, and that was the best one.
There were other issues too, where the penultimate round of the 2010 season was suddenly a non-championship event after the track failed safety inspections, not to mention that you couldn't really see very well. And yet, for the first round of the 2011 season at Assen, 14 cars would line up on the grid. So who was representing who? Well, the remaining 8 cars on the grid were countries. Yeah, no joke. This series had gone full on A1GP, and much like A1GP, this thing was living on borrowed time. The calendar for that year would have seen the championship head to Brazil, Russia, China, South Korea, and New Zealand. And the critical word in that sentence was would, because all of these events would be cancelled, with only the rounds in Assen and Zolder having taken place. After many cancellations, John Martin and Team Australia had won the title. I mean, what there was of it. And the series itself would die a slow death, with basically no more news after the Zolder round that year. So, what is the lesson to take from this series? Well, that motorsports and football don't tend to mix very well, I guess. And that V12 slap? Anyways, thank you all for watching. Drop a comment below, subscribe to the channel if you're awesome, and always remember, keep it respectful, be wholesome, don't be a menace, and as always, I'll see you all later.